Thank you very much. Let me begin by expressing my regrets for arriving here late. New York traffic, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, ensured that we did the last 3 minutes on foot. We had to walk the rest of the way to be able to get here at all. Time is spent, so I'm not going to take too much time. I'm sure, knowing the kind of people in this room, you've all done your research about Ghana, and so I'm not going to bore you telling you that Ghana is on the west coast of Africa. And the last time I checked, they were still there. In the last decade, there's been a lot of excitement about Africa, and there's been hope about Africa, and you have phrases like Africa Rising and all that. I just want to temper that and say it's not without its challenges and its problems. And often one is tempted to think about, an investment destination where all problems have been resolved and, it's they lived happily ever after story. It's not exactly that. Yes, there are very good prospects for investment in Africa. And us leaders in all our countries are doing our best to create the kind of environment that makes it, enabling for investors to want to put their money in there and be able to make a good rate of return. Ghana started early after independence. It was the first country to break away from colonial domination. And we started with a state enterprise model. And so the state was involved in almost every facet of our lives, in production of shoes, in production of matches, for lighting fires, in production of plastics, building materials for houses, in the transport sector, in aviation. Just name it. Every facet of our lives was based on the state enterprises model. And our first president was a socialist, President Kwame Nkrumah, and he built the economy on that model. In later years, we realized that we had all these state enterprises, that were inefficient, and government had to pay subsidies to them every year in order to keep them afloat. And so from the mid-'80s, when we adopted our first structural adjustment program with the IMF, we began to change the model and decided to go for a private sector model. And we started to offload a lot of those state enterprises to the private sector. We have emphasized on creating an enabling environment for the private sector to grow and advance. And we use the hackneyed phrase of the private sector being the engine of growth. And so we have been creating an environment to increase foreign direct investment, but also to boost domestic investment. The private sector has been growing, but not at as fast a rate as we would have wanted. Recently, Ghana has been one of the top performers in Africa and has been seen as one of the countries that has the potential to be the next batch of emerging nations from Africa. That has not been without its challenges. Over the last 5 years, our economy has grown significantly. In 2011, with the advent of oil and gas, it was touted to be the fastest growing economy at almost 14% of GDP that year. Over the last several years, our average growth rate has been above 6%, and last year was 7.4%. But we've had macroeconomic challenges as a result of several factors. I'm not ready to recount here, but from 2012, we began to see a deficit on the fiscal of close to 12%, 11.8% of GDP. And we gradually saw an increase in inflation. And as at last August, inflation had crept up from single digit to 15.9%. We also saw a slide in the value of the currency of almost 30%, which was significant. And so we have been taking corrective measures to restore macroeconomic stability. We came out with a homegrown fiscal consolidation policy, which we started to implement to increase revenues and bring expenditures back under control. One of the major problems we have had has been with the wage bill. We were implementing a new salary scheme to create equity in the public sector wage bill, and it ran away and created a wage spiral, which increased wages from somewhere slightly above 3 billion to almost 9 billion Ghana cedis, which was a very significant increase in expenditure. But we've been putting in place steps to try and tame, that over expenditure. Recently, we realized that we needed, some more assistance to be able to get the situation under control, and so we made a request to the IMF to come and work with us to implement a program. And so as I was leaving Ghana, we had an IMF team that was working with us to come up with a new program. We anticipate that the preliminary talks should be over by this week, 25th, and then we'll continue during the annual meetings of the World Bank and the IMF. And it's my hope that by January, we should start a 3-year IMF program to try and stabilize the macroeconomic environment, but also not only stabilize the macro environment, also undertake a strong program of institutional reforms in order that we create a sustainable base for the macro to be sustainable over time. We are also looking at a strong program which would bring in the World Bank and the IMF and all the other developmental institutions to institute a program that continues to guarantee investments in economic infrastructure in order that the economy can continue to grow, and also to grow the private sector in order that we're able to create more jobs. As part of the program, too, I want to see a strong social intervention program that helps to cushion the poor and vulnerable in society. And so these are the vision, and this is the vision in which we're going into discussions with the IMF. We recently went on the market for our third Eurobond, and I must say, with some amount of success. I had feared the worst. There were anticipation of coupon rates of about 9%. We came in massively at 8.125%, which was quite a relief for us. A lot of that money is going to go into our capital expenditure, investment in infrastructure, but a significant portion of it, 250 million of it, is going to go into what we call the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund, which is going to be a new investment vehicle for financing infrastructure in Ghana. Ghana has a huge need for investment in respect of our fledgling oil and gas sector, which has very good prospects going forward. We have several American companies out of Texas working in Ghana, Cosmos, Vanco, and Hess, and so many of them are active in Ghana's hydrocarbon sector. The potential is good. We have one operational field, which is the Jubilee field, and there's a second field that is expected to come on stream in 2016, which is the 10th field that would increase the amount of oil that Ghana is able to produce. In addition, we have a third prospect, which is the ENI Sankofa field, which we expect will come on stream end 2016 into 2017. And so the potential of a growing oil and gas industry in Ghana is very good. We are about to commission a gas processing plant to bring in enough gas to initially power about 500 megawatts of thermal energy. That will be expanded as the new prospects in oil and gas come on stream, like the 10 field and the Sankofa field, which has a lot of gas. And so as a result of that, we are in partnership with the United States of America. I came away from the last US-Africa summit with the most tangible results back to my people, with a check of almost $500 million under the Millennium Challenge Compact, which is supposed to be invested into the energy sector. We're looking to position Ghana as the energy hub of West Africa to produce enough power, both to meet the increasing demand for power of our own country, but become a net exporter of power to countries that have a deficit. Most of them who are our neighbors have a deficit in power. And so we're looking to increase our own power production so that we can export the excess to other countries that have a huge demand for power. The MCC investment is supposed to go into generation, transmission, and distribution to improve efficiency of the whole value chain for power production. One of the things we're envisaging under the Millennium Challenge Compact is a strong private sector participation in power production in Ghana. And so we have an MOU with General Electric, which we call the Ghana 1000 project, to produce 1,000 megawatts of power and inject it into the Ghanaian transmission grid. There are other independent power producers who have signed power purchase agreements to set up gas-fired thermal plants, to be able to produce power both to satisfy Ghana's power demand and also for export through what we call the West African Power Pool. Ghana is a member of the power pool through which all the transmission grids of the West African countries are interconnected. And so if you have excess power in one country, you can transfer it to another country. We have opportunities for investment in transport. For those of you who know West Africa, there are several significant ports along the West African coast, washed by the Atlantic Ocean. And the significant ones are the Abidjan port, Dakar port, Tema port, Lomé port, and the Lagos port in Apapa. All these ports are in competition with each other to generate as much traffic as we can. And so we are about to embark on a major expansion of our main port, which is the Tema port, to be able to improve the volumes that come in and to improve the turnaround time of ships so that we can bring our imports in faster with less hassle, and then also to be able to capture more of the traffic of the landlocked countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. We're also looking to position Ghana as the aviation hub for West Africa with a strong sub-regional feed into Accra as the transit stop to put passengers on long-haul aircrafts to Europe, to America, to Asia, to Latin America, and the Middle East. And so that's another of the visions we have. Other sectors in which there's been strong investment is telecoms. Ghana has one of the widest, extensions of broadband mobile in the sub-region. And anywhere I go in the country, even the remotest places, I'm able to access my internet and do my WhatsApp messaging and all that. And so it's a good environment. Agriculture is also a priority, and we are looking to increase production of many staples that our people eat and other agricultural products in respect of their value chain. And so we're seeing strong investment in rice production, in soya, in maize production, in poultry, in aquaculture, in tomato production, in vegetable cooking oil, and all that. And so investors who are interested in that sector, can take a look. Let me just end up with what most investors are concerned about, and that is risks. You want to minimize your risk as much as possible. Of course, Ghana is in West Africa, and so all the risk in respect of security, in respect of health, affect our country too. In West Africa, the three main flashpoints are northern Mali, because of the activities of the Tuareg rebels in that area. The other flashpoint is northeastern Nigeria in respect of Boko Haram and the security threat that it poses. And the next risk you might talk about is in 2015, 5 of our countries in West Africa are going to go to elections with different factors that could pose as risks in any election year. But I believe that we have the mechanisms to be able to handle a lot of this, and we're doing that. We had to send a peace force into Mali to guarantee Mali's sovereignty. And since then, there have been talks going on, first in Burkina Faso and Ouagadougou, in which a roadmap was agreed. And just a few months ago, after the ECOWAS meeting, another meeting was convened in Algeria, and all the protagonists to the tensions in Mali signed on to the roadmap, to try and resolve that issue. And so that one is going quite properly. Not so the Boko Haram menace. Boko Haram is expanding its ability to inflict more violence in Nigeria, and we need to work around and see how we can find a solution to that threat. Happily, the international community has responded, US, France, and UK, and they are working together with the Nigerian government to see how they can mount a better response to the threat that Boko Haram poses in the sub-region. Like I said, 2015, we have Guinea, we have Nigeria, we have Cote d'Ivoire, we have Burkina Faso, we have Togo, all going for elections. And each of them carry their own risks. With Burkina Faso, there is the issue of the term limit. The incumbent president is wanting to amend the constitution to allow him to run, another term in office, and that is creating its own tensions. In Nigeria, of course, I spoke about Boko Haram and what is happening there. In Cote d'Ivoire is fairly more stable, and as long as the alliance between the PDC and President Ouattara's party holds, my expectation is that that government might win a second term, and I guess that would be a good thing for Cote d'Ivoire, having come out of a conflict that was created by a disputed election. I think that some stability in Cote d'Ivoire will be helpful to the whole sub-region. Guinea has elections too, and there have been quite some tensions there. My hope is that we'll be able to manage those tensions in order that they have a good election and they're able to continue on the road to peace. Togo is our neighbor, and we take an interest in what happens there. And I'm sure that with the mechanisms we have in ECOWAS, we'll be able to ensure that all these elections go peacefully and we don't have any untoward situation. I guess the most topical threat currently is Ebola. And I visited the 3 Ebola countries recently as a visit of solidarity to try to break the ostracization that they have been subjected to as a result of the disease. This is the first time there's been an outbreak of Ebola in West Africa, and it actually caught everybody by surprise. Our people don't understand the disease. They don't, really know how to react to it. And so the initial reaction has been one of panic, one of misunderstanding. But during my recent visit, I realized that people are coming to terms, so they're beginning to understand how the disease is spread, and with knowledge and awareness comes power. And so the people are getting empowered to be able to protect themselves. The thing about Ebola is it goes to the most, important human nature or instinct that we have, and that is to give care to our fellows, either your children or your wife or your brother or your sister. I mean, Ebola attacks caregivers. And so for people who care for the sick, either a relative or a health worker, it's them who are most at risk of catching Ebola and dying. And it creates quite heart-rending scenes. I mean, if you see a mother that is sick of Ebola, and a child's natural instinct is to go to his mother, but then it risks getting infected if the child goes to the mother. And so keeping the mother and child separate is, a tragedy, that it's very difficult to accept. And that's why we need to all respond and ensure that we get this back under control. The peculiar thing about Ebola in West Africa, it's happened in East and Central Africa, and it's always been very quickly contained. There have been several outbreaks in East and Central Africa that have been quickly contained. And so the whole world started watching, thinking that, oh, well, I'm sure this thing will be contained in a relatively short period. So the initial international response was very slow in coming. And I had thought that with an Ebola outbreak in West Africa, it was going to be worse than in East and Central Africa because that is a more mobile region. People move more freely across borders in West Africa than they do in some of the remote communities in the jungles of East and Central Africa. And we all have a 90-day visa-free visit to each other's countries. You don't need a visa to go to another West African country. You find a West African in Lagos today, tomorrow you find him in Dakar, the next day he's in Ouagadougou. And so when this outbreak occurred, I mean, it should have struck all of us that with the way people move in West Africa, it was likely that the disease was going to spiral, across borders. But the initial panic reaction of closing borders and stopping airline flights, have made the situation more difficult. When I went to the 3 countries, the situation was quite dire. The airports were eerily quiet, no planes on the tarmac, and the airport workers were either resting under trees or lying on top of those their tug machines with nothing to do. And what it does is to prevent personnel and logistics from being able to come into those countries. And so as chairman of ECOWAS, I immediately offered to use Accra as a staging post to create an air corridor into the countries. And I had a discussion with the Secretary General, and he accepted. And on the basis of that, we have this new UN mission that's going to take place. And Ghana is willing to offer every assistance to the United Nations to be able to make this mission a success. My anticipation is that if all of us put our shoulders to it, I mean, within a 6 to 9 months period, we should be able to turn this outbreak around and send it back to where it came from. And so with those words, I guess I'll end here, and thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.